This is the Energy Vista podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. It's 3:02 p.m. in New York City, and today I'm welcoming Dr. Benjamin Schmitt to discuss Europe's energy security. And I'm very happy because he's one of the most dedicated guests I could think about, especially amid this very tumultuous geopolitical landscape that we're living in today. So, welcome back, Benjamin, to this Energy Vista podcast. You had been a prior guest, and you're the 53rd guest, actually. But I have to mention that it has been more than 2 years and a half since my 52nd episode. So, what happened during this time? I got busy with the company I co founded back in 2018 with my husband, GasVista, which was a market intelligence company, data firm that gave birth to Leviaton, or maritime predictive AI platform, that we sold to Synmax. And after being acquired, I worked for Synmax until this January. So I'm in the process of reinventing myself. And it's actually a natural evolution for founders post acquisition. And I'm very much looking forward to this time. And I feel very lucky, actually, to be in this position. So that's a quick update for me. Now let's turn the spotlight to you.
Well, wait a second.
Last
Before you
time,
say that, I want to say to the audience, everyone should give a big congratulations to Leslie and her whole team at Synmax and their the wonderful work they've done on open source intelligence monitoring for the LNG industry and shipping and things like this. It's been an absolutely tremendous run. I've been so excited to follow it and be in touch with you, Leslie, as you've gone about it. And congratulations on the acquisition. And here's to what's next.
thank you so much. Thank you. So last time we exchanged on this podcast was 2020, so a while ago, and you were at Harvard at the time. Now you're at Penn University, and you're actually focusing. You have two hats, but uh, that join each other. So you are a senior fellow at the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Clement Center for Energy Policy. So, can you summarize a little bit quickly for our audience your role and your kind of two hats?
Sure. Yeah. Last time I was on this podcast, I was at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, working on a telescope project that was located or is located in Antarctica at the South Pole. Still affiliated with Harvard and the Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, also the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. But I have since moved to Penn for a joint academic appointment at the University of Pennsylvania in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, where I'm working on helping develop a set of infrastructure and instrumentation for the Simons Observatory. It's a new set of experimental cosmology telescopes looking at the cosmic microwave background at 5,190 meters in elevation in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile. And so we're working on that down there. I'm also the project director of a subset of that project, which is to install for the first time a large-scale photovoltaic power plant to ensure the energy security of our extremely remote telescope infrastructure up on that mountain, on that volcano, actually, in the Atacama Desert. So coming soon, maybe we come back and talk about that when it's up and running. But 3 megawatt power plant up in the Chilean Andes. It's going to be a very I think transformational project, not only for us but also for all sorts of areas of giving an example for energy security and critical infrastructure protection. So coming soon. At the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy, I'm teaching and doing research on European energy security, as always, on sanctions issues related to the Russian Federation and technology export controls, open source intelligence methods, basically a lot of open source commercial satellite data analysis and AIS analysis and all the sort of things that you developed with your company as well, Leslie. And then also working quite a bit on critical infrastructure protection, both in Northern Europe and in East Asia. And I think we'll get a little bit more into that today.
Yes. So let's stop to right into today's topic. Europe's energy security. We've been both, analyzing and advising, writing about this for several, for me, almost 2 decades. But I must say that right now we're in the middle of a geopolitical upheaval. Europe is undergoing what I call a shock therapy that is administered by Washington. And I feel that Paris, Berlin, Kiev, Oslo, Warsaw, London, you name it, they're all in ebullition right now. Following the Munich security conference, they are scratching their heads, trying to find a budget for defense, thinking about the future of the transatlantic relationship. Eastern Europe, I feel, is almost on a war footing, thinking they could be invaded at any time. So a lot of emotions, and it's a tough wake up call for Europe. So initially, we were planning to talk only about hybrid warfare, but I think it's important, um, to take into consideration the context where we are in today. Even if I want to cut through the noise with you and maybe not just focusing on the latest headlines, um, but big picture, like, is Europe right now, Europe's energy security, is it in a better place, worse place, or kind of same place under the Trump administration? Or it's too early
Well,
to
look,
say?
it's really too early to say where Europe's energy security is in the Trump administration. We're only, I guess, a month in as of yesterday or today when we're recording this. I mean, look, we don't need to go through all the headlines. Zelensky is not a dictator. The Russian Federation, unprovoked, invaded Ukraine in 2014, and then it launched its full-scale invasion in February of 2022. There is no doubt about that. The notion that we would have, quote, opportunities for fantastic geopolitical or commercial cooperation with the Russian Federation is utterly false and, frankly, a dangerous notion that would ultimately undermine Europe's energy security in the future and enable a return to business as usual, quote unquote, on energy with Putin's Kremlin, which we absolutely cannot go back to, not only because of Russia's large scale invasion of Ukraine, of course, but the fact that it has reached a pinnacle or a peak of energy weaponization that has been continuously growing over the years. Let's be clear. The Russian Federation has targeted energy and critical infrastructure through kinetic military strikes across Ukraine to expand its humanitarian crisis and the misery of the Ukrainian people as they heroically push back on Putin's Kremlin in its invasion. But at the same time, that has basically grown out of years of energy cuts, of threatened or overt natural gas cutoffs of European nations based specifically on geopolitical demands that the Kremlin under Vladimir Putin has made against European nations, and certainly has evolved into all sorts of things from elite capture when former senior European officials have gone on to work for Russian state-owned energy enterprises in particular. I'm looking at you, former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, and you, former Austrian Foreign Minister Karen Kneissel, and I'm looking at you, former French Prime Minister Francois Fillon, who have all gone on to work for Russian state oil and gas firms, oil and gas trading firms, all of these sort of things. And we're now seeing, unfortunately, a pushback on all of the sort of regulations that we've built up over the years to become more resilient to Russian hybrid threats from political influence and elite capture. With the rollback of the Foreign Agents Registration Act in the United States, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, we need to get our house in order quickly and reverse these moves in the United States and help set a norms-setting process so that Europe also can push back on Russia's energy weaponization. So, no, there cannot be a return to business as usual. No, there are not great opportunities for U.S. firms to enhance Russia's energy production. That would be absolutely the wrong move. And no, we can't overlook even even with this horrific war going on in Ukraine, the fact that Russia has had a much broader energy weaponization playbook over the years, that it has weaponized energy across Europe and around the world in a variety of ways.
So, Benjamin, I'm going to play the devil advocate, right? To have a kind of a dialogue, because in Europe, we had started to hear some voices, and they didn't wait for Washington, right? They didn't wait for the Trump administration, but there were already some European interest groups, even some mainstream policymakers in Europe, that were starting to consider consuming more again of Russian products. Part of that is because Europe is experiencing, an industrial crisis, completely loss of competitiveness. So it's mostly driven by economic interests. Part of it is because both France and Germany are going through a political crisis, very weak countries, weak governments, with some weak coalitions. Germany is about to get its elections. With some fringe of extreme right movements that have traditionally been closer to Russia. Um, so, with this context, I don't think Europe, I agree, some bridges have been burnt between Europe and Russia. And at least on the gas side, I don't think Russian gas will ever come back to 40%, of shares in the European gas market where it were before the invasion of Ukraine. That said, right now it's at about 17% of the whole European gas imports. Can it go a little bit higher? Will Europe accept that? Are we going to see a unity, some kind of divisions between the European governments on this topic or not? Of course, we cannot discuss that until there is a resolution of the Ukraine-Russia war. But medium term, do you see Russian products playing a bigger role? And by the way, just after the war started in 2002, I had written that Russian energy is down but not out. Because beyond gas, we know that Russia has exported other products to Europe and keeps exporting. There is more attention on oil and gas, but this is not the only energy that Russia is exporting. So, with that in mind, do you think that Russian shares of its energy in Europe can grow in the near future, medium term, longer term?
I think there's two questions there. Can it and should it? The answer is it should not return.
Right.
It absolutely should not. There are clear national security considerations now at play. Again, we're going to talk about the critical infrastructure protection side, but that is absolutely part and parcel to this decision-making process. But, look, can it? Absolutely it can. And that's what I've been saying since the start of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that we need to be resistant to any political moves by parties, as you pointed out, the far-right AfD party in Germany, for example, who has called directly in recent weeks for the resurrection of Russia's Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines. We have seen other fringe, political parties and factions in Germany and elsewhere also call for this. And of course, we've overtly seen both the current leadership in Slovakia and Hungary calling for not only resumption of natural gas, whether it be through Ukraine or elsewhere, but also oil products, and making sure that they are pushing back on the push to increase Russia energy sanctions. Well, first of all, as long as this hot war is going on in Ukraine, there absolutely can be zero sanctions relief. And even if it were to come to a ceasefire, there cannot be sanctions relief on the energy sector, because it is not only related to this war, okay? It is related to multiple decades of energy weaponization. The fact that Europe was willing to get itself hooked on Russian energy products, not only gas, as you point out, but oil and other products, refined products, and things like this, and not to mention nuclear fuels, which is another strategic threat of reliance. it doesn't matter necessarily that it just got there. It should have never been able to get there because there should have been a significant amount of geopolitical pushback. But
So
again,
no, yeah.
unfortunately, we hadn't seen that, and there's too many of these captured elites or strategically corrupt, Russia-linked political parties in Europe that have pushed for Russian energy to come back or be promoted before it was even gone from the scene.
Yeah, knowing all the dangers that come with importing and being dependent on Russian products, why do you think Western elites and Western policymakers have been trying over and over to do resets with Russia, right? That's the case with different American administrations. That's the case in Europe with different, in France, in Germany, always trying to give Putin or, the Kremlin the benefit of the doubt and not understanding basically, yeah, maybe the ideology here and the danger for Europe.
Look, it's driven by pure greed. I think that Putin, all the way back to his KGB days, has looked to the West and said, "What are the strategic weaknesses of the capitalist and open societies that we have?" And I think that the biggest thing that we have is that there are political actors that are willing to sell themselves out after they leave office. Hopefully not while they're still in office, but that may be the case as well in certain situations. But the fact that they are willing to put profit before principle and put national security in the back seat when to other considerations, including getting quote unquote cheap gas from Russia and things like this. The problem is, it's often said, there is no such thing as cheap Russian gas. I agree with that, but I don't think that people often go beyond that to explain why that's the case. It's because of all of the strings that are attached, and whether or not it is overtly said, the point is you get your society hooked on this energy source that then is in return threatened to be cut off or threatened to have price hikes in it, all of these sort of things using monopolistic principles, which Gazprom has used, that Rosneft has used, and others, that the EU has built out regulatory structures to push back on. And so the notion that we could ever go back to these bad old days is a dangerous one and something that we really need to resist. Am I, naive to the fact that there won't be politicians and business actors and all sorts of other groups that may be pushing for a return to business as usual? No, I know that it's going to happen. It's funny, Leslie. I've talked to German politicians and German thought leaders and experts ever since Russia's large-scale invasion began about my concerns about this, and oftentimes they'll say, "No, we have a Zeitenwende. We have this Olaf Scholz announced change in the way that we are going to, basically move away from Russian reliance, and this could never ever come back." I frankly laughed every time I heard that because, as you and I well know, this temptation is too great. And if you go back again in KGB thug Putin's past, he supposedly has done his doctoral thesis. Whether or not he himself wrote it or not is a topic of academic conversation. But pointed out the direct linkages between using energy for economic gain and also using energy for geopolitical concessions and national security strategic purposes. We have to understand this. This guy is not going to change. He is
Right.
a war criminal that is bent on restoring the Soviet Union to some extent. And he started in Georgia and moved to Ukraine and has effectively captured Belarus. And we need to make sure this does not go any further and that we roll back that push from the Kremlin. And don't get ourselves intertwined in the energy mess that we have been in as the transatlantic community over the past 20 years with Russia.
So, as you know, in some European quarters, the other argument that they put forward is that Europe cannot be neither too dependent on the US for its products, for its liquid
Mm-hmm.
gold. Both of us, we know that you cannot make equivalence between how Russia is weaponizing its energy, and the fact that in the US, the exports are driven by private companies. You said it very clearly in our podcast, actually, that I listened to again back in 2020. There is no America Corp, right?
America
Behind
prom. America prom.
America Prom, behind US LNG exports, for instance.
Yeah.
However, right now, uh, there has been some politicization of US LNG with tariffs. And it's not the first time. We saw that also with the first Trump administration. And with the Biden administration, we saw also some risk with US LNG, more on the regulatory side, environmental side, and so on. So, but at the same time, when I look at the Europe's gas security right now, I see that it's very diversified in a way, and more diversified than it was back in 2021 or 2022. So if you look at Norway is actually the largest exporter right now to Europe.
Mhm.
And if you look at the whole pie of European gas imports, Norway is 30%, followed by the US, 21%, and then Russia, still 18%, considering both LNG and pipeline. But then you have also Algeria, which is about the same as Russia. And then you have others, right? So, and we know that, there is an abundance of gas supply around the world, and it's not just coming from the US. And I don't think Europe will ever reach a phase where US LNG, goes beyond 1/4 of all European gas imports. But what do you say to those Europeans that are basically afraid of giving away one dependence for another?
Well, look, uh, first of all, don't go back to business as usual with Putin. That's my
Yeah.
first message to any Europeans that are considering that. The rhetoric coming out of the Trump White House has been, frankly, atrocious to the our partners and allies in Europe over the last week, and I can understand to some extent why they would be trying to push some sort of moral equivalency. We are not in any way at that point, and so that would be disingenuous to say the least. But the thing that I go back to is, you have to remember that, as I said in the last time we spoke, we don't have an America prom. We don't have a Gazprom equivalent where we have a Ministry of Natural Gas that is making political decisions of where and how much to send of any resource to the global market. These are private companies. It is not, not out of the question that you would see some level of government intervention on our natural gas markets and our ability to export. We saw that, as you pointed out. Again, this is not drawing a moral equivalence, but just pointing out different examples. We saw that during the Biden administration when there was a pause on new licenses for LNG exports and LNG export facilities, and that was driven by climate considerations. And we've seen, to say the least, threats and overt comments about tariffs and the balance of trade possibly being between the United States and Europe on basically having Europe buy more liquefied natural gas. But at the same time, we don't have, even this government doesn't call up Cheniere or other natural gas exporters and say you have to send this cargo at this time to this port for this amount of money. And so what we will see, I think, is that this increase in LNG production and export by the Trump administration, while it will do nothing to achieve our climate goals, I think that nevertheless it will increase global energy security because it will increase LNG market liquidity and continue to push LNG into the role of being a more fungible global energy commodity. Remember, we were talking, less than 10 years ago about incredibly small amount of spot purchases of LNG cargoes from the United States, and now we're it's a major supplier on the global market, and that
I
that is
agree.
all to Europe's benefit.
Exactly. I was going to say for lower prices, to the benefits of Europe, for more supply, lower prices. Absolutely. You remember when the Germans were, at the peak of the Nord Stream debate and saga, were saying, oh, the only reason why the US is opposed to the pipeline is because they want to sell more gas to us. And which is interesting in today's environment because the Trump
And by the way,
administration,
sorry, they
yeah,
were saying that before we even had the ability to export natural gas. They were
right,
saying that
right,
in 14 and 15, right?
yes,
They were presaging this argument, so it made no sense then at all.
yes, and right now, what the Trump administration is actually doing, if they really want to mend links with Russia, and that eventually Russia will send more gas into Europe again, it's completely against the economic interest in a way of U.S. gas and U.S. companies
It
exporting LNG.
absolutely would be. It would also be against, frankly, President Trump's own correct aversion to projects like Nord Stream 2.
Right,
He will say that he was the first. No one was talking about Nord Stream 2 before Donald Trump. That is obviously demonstrably
right.
false. You and I talked about it many years before that, to say the least. But nevertheless, he had the right policy instinct and push on that. To have the second Trump administration go in the reverse direction and somehow, uh, you know, green light and lift sanctions on Nord Stream and go in the other direction, that would be a tremendous policy error, a tremendous national security error. And frankly, all of the things that you pointed out would be reversed in a way that would be, unthinkable even a few years ago. And so I hope they don't go down that route. And I can
Did you
be,
see did you
yeah,
see by the way the articles that an American businessman is trying to
yes.
buy whatever is left of Nord Stream 2,
So
which is
yes,
interesting.
yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the things that I fear, is that these sort of gambits by, a US businessman or whoever it would maybe be, whether it's that or those in Europe, et cetera, to try to rebrand Nord Stream and say, oh, this is an American owned project that they can pick up for pennies on the dollar from near bankruptcy in the canton of Zug, Switzerland. This would be absolutely dangerous as well, because first of all, this notion that if an American owned Nord Stream, then somehow they would be able to, basically control and push back on any energy weaponization that could take place through the infrastructure, is ludicrous. I mean, it's simply ludicrous, because guess why? The the end point of that Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, for that matter, are still in the Russian Federation. And so Vladimir Putin's Russia has the resource and can decide to turn on the tap, yes or no, at any given moment for any given geopolitical contingency. So can't happen. And I fear that there will be lobbyists in Europe, and there'll be, frankly, lobbyists in this country, or business people that will try to band together to resurrect these projects. And I believe that that would be a tremendous national security error. There is no way that letting more Russian gas into Europe would make Europe more secure, that the U.S. would be able to, quote unquote, control this in any way. And anyone who tells you otherwise is, very underinformed about how European energy security is actually developed and operated over the past decades.
Yeah. So that brings me to my little pop quiz to you.
Oh wow! Okay, pop quiz. Here we go. Trivia. A new
Yeah.
podcast area. We're doing a trivia. Okay, let's do it.
Who blew up the three lines of the Nord Stream pipeline back in September 2022?
Okay, so I've been doing a large scale research project here at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at Penn, that has built on research that I think you and I probably already were talking about back in 2020, on tracking vessels that are associated with Russian energy trade, with Russia's energy weaponization, and frankly, at that point, we were talking about tracking vessels that were trying to get around U.S. sanctions to stop the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in 2021. Well, look, I have scoured the entirety of Northern Europe to meet with experts. I have traveled from Svalbard in the north, near the North Pole, to Helsinki and Tallinn in in the east down to Germany and to Brussels and NATO headquarters, and met with experts along the way. I've met with law enforcement officials, coast guards, navies, all of these sort of entities, and also have gone out on the Baltic Sea itself and chartered a vessel just a few months ago in September out to the Nord Stream 2 blast site southeast of Bornholm. Southeast of Bornholm, in the Baltic Sea, Bornholm, Denmark, the island in the western Baltic Sea, to get sonar data of the blast site and better understand this. And all of I will just say, this is a trailer for the report, but we have a lot of data, none of which supports the narrative that came out from Seymour Hersh that the United States and Norway banded together to blow up Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And it raises absolutely significant questions. And frankly, we look on with significant
Was it not?
skepticism.
Was it the
Uh,
U.S. and Norway?
no, it was not the U.S. and Norway.
No, but the article from that you mentioned, I thought it was Ukraine and the U.S.
So Seymour Hersh came out with a story in, I believe, 2023, claiming that the U.S. and Norway had blown up Nord Stream 1 and 2. Separately, there has been a narrative that has been covered quite a bit about a quote-unquote pro-Ukrainian sailboat team that went out and sailed from the port of Warnemünde or Hoaduna in near the port of Rostock in northeastern Germany, and blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2. And from our results, we have found data that basically casts those stories, at least to a significant amount of skepticism, if not just to say that there are a significant number of fact-based questions that need to be answered, whether you can actually conclude that. And there is a significant amount of evidence that frankly points to the Russian Federation in this. There were Russian seabed warfare capable vessels, not just any vessels, but actual seabed warfare capable vessels that were on the Nord Stream 1 blast site, seen with satellite data, just a few days before Nord Stream was blown up in late September of 2022. Earlier in September, you have the sailboat that was reportedly sailing around, this quote-unquote pro-Ukrainian sailboat that would have been laying the explosives to blow up this pipeline. And frankly, there's no mention of the fact that these Russian vessels were there months before that as well at the exact blast site. And so this is a big question, because one of the pushbacks I often get is, well, the Russians were just there to protect the pipeline, right? And this is one of the notions that's been out there. And frankly, if you look at what happened, at least on the face of it, again, at least what open source intelligence shows us and what open source reporting has showed us, is that you have the sailboat sailing and then the Russian vessels showing up just before the Nord Stream blast took place. However, then you also have, well before the sailboat ever sailed, back in June, months before that explosion took place, the same Russian seabed warfare capable vessels also at the Nord Stream 1 blast site. And then throughout 2021, we saw the Russian construction fleet that was circumventing U.S. sanctions to complete the construction of Nord Stream 2, sitting for weeks and months at a time directly over what would eventually become the Nord Stream 2 blast site. And so there are a lot of, again, areas that point to the Russian Federation as a potential culprit for this. And I will say that will basically end the trailer there and say that this report will be out in the coming weeks, and I look forward to sharing it with your audience.
Okay, I'm very curious about it. So short answer, Russia.
Yes, short answer, Russia. But again, it's more of a we view with skepticism conclusion than we know that it was Russia conclusion.
Yeah, and on my end, the Russian theory makes sense also on the contractual gas side perspective, because they were able to declare force majeure only after the blast. And many other motivations.
There's a lot to talk about that I will say I'm happy to come on and do a deep dive specifically on that and go through all of the gory details if your audience can is interested in that. And
okay, let's move to the second question.
All right.
Who is behind the attack of the undersea power cable? Link 2?
S-Link 2. Okay, so on Christmas Day, December 25th of 2024, so just 2.5 months ago, the Eagle S, a Cook Island flagged cargo container ship, uh, effectively dragged its anchor, was shown to have dragged its anchor through the S-Link 2 electricity cable between Finland and Estonia. And again, this is in the weeks before Finland and, or sorry, the Baltic states were trying to, and then ultimately have in the past few weeks successfully desynchronize their electricity grid from the old Brel system, the Russian system, Soviet system, and linked it now with the European Union. And so to take away the grid balancing conduits that and grid stabilization conduits of S-Link 2 to Finland, that could possibly point to Russian motivation to undermine that synchronization process. And of course, we've seen a lot of these other cable cuts, whether it be the Yipeng 3 that cut the Sea Lion 1 and BCS cable in November of 2024, or other examples, including one that happened earlier today. I don't know if you saw that. There was a
Yes.
cable cut of Sea Line 1 again being cut off of the island of Gotland in the central Baltic Sea. Haven't even done any preliminary analysis on that yet, but again, what we're seeing when you actually look at the data, let's take Yipeng 3, for example. The Yipeng 3 was shown to have been operating as a bulk carrier in Chinese waters from, if I look back at, basically in my own analysis, looking back at its operations, basically for almost all of the past 5 years, never leaving Chinese waters. If you then look at and see in, I believe, March of last year of 2024, the ownership changed of that vessel. This is a Chinese flag vessel. And 3 days after the ownership changed, for the first time in almost a 5-year period, that Yipeng 3 vessel sailed directly to Nadhotka near Vladivostok in the Russian Far East, and then eventually sailed around the world until it was making runs between Murmansk in the Russian Federation in the Arctic to the Eastern Mediterranean, eventually going to Ust-Luga in the Russian Federation before having cut these cables. And so, again, pointing out that there is a significant change, at least in openly observable operations of these sort of vessels before they do this, again, points to the Russian Federation in a lot of these cases. So I guess to say Russia again, if you to answer the
Russia,
question.
another one for Russia. So this is actually, we see an upstick in those kind of hybrid warfare activities where European infrastructure, whether it's energy related or technology related, are being intentionally targeted, damaged, but at the same time, Europe doesn't call it an act of war. We don't really retaliate in any way. I don't think so. However, we're starting to think of how to protect those infrastructure. Where does that leave Europe? More vulnerable? I think we've just mentioned Norway earlier, which is now the largest exporter to Europe of gas. If anything were to happen to this pipeline bringing Norwegian gas, it would be like a huge um, security concern for Europe. Prices would go, would skyrocket and leave Europe in a very bad situation. How, and you're looking into this specifically, how to protect those infrastructure, and how, what should be Europe's new code of conduct when it comes to Russia for those kind of accidents, incidents, and
Well, look, I've been calling for NATO Article 4, which is a consultative mechanism, to be enacted since these incidents have taken place. And look, we're talking about offshore critical infrastructure protection right now, but just so the audience knows, we've seen dozens and dozens of these incidents onshore, not only against energy infrastructure, but also against transport infrastructure, rail lines. We've seen cuts of telecommunications cables. We've seen in Finland, guy wires of the of cell towers get cut and the cell tower get pushed over, and we've seen a number of these sort of things, and to say nothing of Russian military drones reportedly being seen over, for example, German LNG facilities like the Brunsbüttel LNG terminal last August, in August of 2024. There were reports of that happening. So there's a lot of these that have not been explained. Some of them, however, have been attributed either to Russian actors or non-Russian nationals that have been shown to have been recruited via Telegram and other social media uh, by the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, to carry out these acts of sabotage. And I call it kind of Putin's dirty deals done dirt cheap, to grab the AC/DC line. And saying we're going to pay you a little bit of money, local ne'er do well, and in exchange you have to do a little amount of sabotage. And so we've seen this, and frankly, I've even seen this in my research. In kind of a meta sort of situation. I was speaking at a conference in Bonn, Germany, last January, on critical infrastructure protection and Nord Stream and all of these sort of European energy issues related to this. And trying to get back to the airport in Frankfurt from Bonn, I was planning on taking the last high-speed rail connection so I could get the rest of the conference, stay in, and then go to the airport from Siegburg Bonn to the Frankfurt airport. And I couldn't take that. And the reason I couldn't take that was that all of the trains were canceled that afternoon because the electricity cables for that rail line were also cut. And so, again, in the height of irony, I had to leave early a critical infrastructure protection focused energy security conference because of a critical infrastructure protection issue or attack going on a rail line that I actually needed to use. And so, we need to be much more clear-eyed. I think NATO Article 4, which again is this consultative mechanism where the alliance announces that we know that these acts are going on, especially those that have been attributed. We can attribute them to the Russian Federation, and these are the sort of steps that we're going to take to push back, or at least to politically point out to the Kremlin that we know what you're doing. We are willing to say it publicly, and to raise the level of deterrence against the Kremlin on these sort of activities, but also, Leslie, to make it clear to our own publics that we're taking this seriously. And so NATO has done a lot of stuff, but it's not there yet.
Why is Russia testing the limits here? What is the message?
Yeah. I mean, the message is clear. The message is, first of all, trying to undermine confidence in Western societies that their electorates are, basically the people in these countries are concerned, trying to raise the concern in the electorates of these countries that their leadership can't protect them from Russian hybrid threats. And frankly, also to undermine Western support for Ukraine, that these sort of attacks will go on so long as the West is supporting Ukraine in its heroic defense. Well, guess what? We can't give into that sort of blackmail. We can't give into that sort of fear mongering. And again, that undermines our energy security and energy stability, and only can lead to energy poverty in the future if we don't do something about it. So again, that's part of it. But then the other thing is, there's a number of examples where I would call this, and I've heard and frankly have interviewed other military-focused experts and former officials that call these shaping operations. And what a shaping operation means is it's something to basically set up the battle space before, or basically to before an attack takes place, or to try to undermine your adversary's resilience in case there's a future contingency. And so one example of this, and one of the first examples that we looked at in our study here at Penn, was the connection between the island of Svalbard near the North Pole and the Norwegian mainland. That was cut by a Russian fishing vessel, the Melkart 5. And we assess that may very well have been in the Kremlin's interest to have this sabotage act take place, to cut off at least one of the two cables connecting Svalbard to Norway, because Svalbard hosts one of the largest ground stations for telecommunications, satellite communications, commercial satellite communications on the planet. And so really, something that happened in early January of 2022. And so again, just weeks before its large-scale invasion of Ukraine, it's doing this. And if you're going back to your example that you brought up of the S-Link 2 cable being cut in in December of last year, again, just weeks before the Baltic states were to desynchronize from the Russian grid and synchronize
Yes.
with the EU. So again, shaping operations, the other
Yeah.
motivation.
Yeah. I feel now that, we're looking at the future of NATO, the transatlantic relationship. We'll have to come back to this to see, which umbrella organization is best suited to take into under its, umbrella this topic of protection of critical infrastructure. For now, I agree NATO, maybe the EU. Or maybe a special new European defense force to be
And I'll
seen.
just say NATO has done under the political level, right at the
Yeah,
operational level. I think they've done a tremendous job. I've
right.
met with the personnel of the new NATO Critical Energy Infrastructure Protection Cell, or Subsea Infrastructure Protection Cell at NATO headquarters. It was set up in 2023. There's now a NATO Operational Center for Offshore Critical Infrastructure Protection in Northcom in the United Kingdom, and of course they have launched Operation Baltic Sentry in the recent weeks to deter Russia or any other actor from going after subsea infrastructure. But it's a difficult task, as you well know from your days with Sinmax, of just how much territory that you would have to monitor and defend, and it's just a very significant technical challenge.
Yeah. Great. So we have 2 minutes to move to your personal question, because we talk so much about Europe's energy security. Uh, so Benjamin, you ingest on a daily basis a lot of information. What's your routine? Like, do you learn? Like, how do you read? What do you read? What kind of knowledge do you keep from all your education? And is it constant study, constant learning? Like for me, you're like kind of a modern version of Gargantua, and I mean it as a compliment. I don't know if you're familiar, but like
I'm not
raising a
familiar with
king.
Gargantua.
You're not? Okay.
No.
So it's a protagonist in a story written by Rabelais. So he was like a physician, a prolific reader, educator, well versed in the classics, and he thought how to best educate somebody, right? Like that was like one of the novel with the
Sure.
Gargantua, and it's like testing some theories on how to best educate someone. And one of his conclusion is like a constant regimen of constant study and different disciplines. And when I look at you, you have some physics in your background, you have politics, security studies. So how do you bridge everything? And just like the amount of information that need to be consumed, and at the same time, we work, in a world with social media that can divert your attention, and you're on social media. We have AI now coming to the picture, with the question of how to remain relevant, us as experts. So I don't know, it's a big question,
Yeah. Uh,
but
well,
I'm
look,
just curious.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's I'll try to do Gargantua justice here. Um, in terms of the information that I digest on a daily basis, I try to keep AI out of my information diet for now. But in terms of it's a wide range of from anything from journal articles to a lot of consumption of news reports of what's going on. I think that's in terms of these critical infrastructure protection incidents and things like this. I read a lot of Norwegian and Danish and Finnish and Swedish language media in particular. I think that in this case, kind of the four uh, Nordic public broadcasters that are looking into these issue sets, they often are the gold standard in the Baltic Sea region for reporting on this. And so I'm constantly reading DR and NKT and SVT and Yle in Finland. So give those four a shout out. And then just in general, again, I tell my students this all the time. It's something where you need to keep your baseline reading up in terms of broader strategic reading, scientific articles, scientific books and texts and things like this. and at the same time couple that with an information, trying to get an information environment that understands what are good sources on social media for open source intelligence, what are good sources of information that is maybe not reading, but rather for data analysis. I have a account on Planet. Penn is supporting that for our entire campus here. So Planet is a commercial geospatial imagery company that primarily operates optical satellites. I use marine traffic. Of course, I've looked at Synmax and Leviathan and the sort of products that you've looked at. And again, it's a synergy of all of these, and then you have to actually bring that back out to the public in a way that is understandable and getting your analysis out. And so it's a balance between um, trying to plan and write large scale research reports, and also sending out sit reps on a daily or weekly basis when necessary to keep folks up to speed on what's going on. And so it's a balance and it's a struggle, but I'll try to do Gargantua proud in the future.
I think you're doing it very well. Thank you so much, Benjamin. It was a great pleasure to have you. And we'll talk soon again. I think we'll have a lot to discuss in the coming months.
Absolutely, Leslie. Always glad to be on.
This episode was recorded on February 21st, 2025. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.